The invitation arrived on cream-colored cardstock with elegant gold lettering, the kind that screams expensive wedding planner and unlimited budget. Mr. and Mrs. Richard Thompson request the pleasure of your company at the marriage of their daughter, Victoria Elizabeth Thompson, to Mr. James Michael Harrison. The ceremony would take place at the Riverside Country Club in Greenwich, Connecticut, followed by a reception in the club's grand ballroom. I traced my finger over my sister Victoria's name, feeling that familiar mix of pride and anxiety that came with anything involving my younger sister. At 32, Victoria had always been the golden child. Harvard MBA, six-figure salary at a Manhattan investment firm, and now marrying James, whose family owned a chain of luxury hotels across New England. Everything in Victoria's life appeared perfect from the outside, polished to a magazine-worthy shine. "Mom, is that Aunt Victoria's wedding invitation?" My 15-year-old daughter Sophie looked up from her homework spread across our kitchen table in our modest split-level home in suburban Hartford. The contrast between our middle-class life and Victoria's world of country clubs and designer everything had always been stark, but I'd tried not to let it bother me. "It is," I said, setting the invitation on the counter. "The wedding's in 3 weeks." Sophie's face lit up with excitement. "Can I be in the wedding party? I know I'm not a little kid anymore, but maybe I could do a reading or help with something." My heart clenched at the hope in her voice. Sophie had always admired her glamorous aunt, the successful career woman who sent expensive birthday gifts and took us to fancy restaurants during her rare visits to Hartford. To Sophie, Victoria represented everything sophisticated and exciting about adult life. "We'll see, honey," I said carefully. "Aunt Victoria has been planning this for months. I'm sure everything's already arranged." But Sophie's question planted a seed of anxiety in my stomach. Victoria and I had grown more distant over the years, our relationship strained by unspoken resentments and very different life choices. She'd made it clear that she considered my decision to be a single mother at 22 to be a mistake that had derailed my potential. I'd chosen to raise Sophie on my own after her father disappeared, working my way through nursing school while juggling night shifts and babysitters. Victoria, meanwhile, had followed the path our parents had always envisioned: elite education, prestigious career, marriage to someone from the right kind of family. She'd never said outright that she was ashamed of my choices, but her comments over the years had made her feelings clear. "It's such a shame you never finished your degree at Yale," she'd say, conveniently forgetting that I'd left school because I was pregnant and couldn't afford both tuition and raising a child. "Sophie's so bright. Imagine what she could accomplish with the right opportunities." The wedding planning had already created tension between us. Victoria had made it clear that she expected a sophisticated affair, mentioning more than once that James's family moved in very exclusive circles. When I'd asked about bringing Sophie as my +1, Victoria had hesitated before saying she'd look into it, as if my own daughter was some kind of liability. 2 days later, my phone rang while I was finishing my shift at Hartford Hospital. Victoria's name appeared on the screen, and I answered with the kind of cautious optimism I always felt when talking to my sister. "Catherine, I wanted to talk to you about the wedding." Victoria's voice had that crisp, professional tone she used when she was about to deliver bad news. "I've been thinking about the guest list and the overall atmosphere we're trying to create." "Of course," I said, stepping into the hospital break room for privacy. "What's on your mind?" "Well, it's about Sophie. I know you were hoping to bring her, but honestly, I think it would be better if she didn't attend." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What do you mean?" "The thing is, Catherine, this is going to be a very formal affair. James's family has certain expectations, and there will be a lot of important business contacts there. I just think a teenager might feel out of place, and I want everyone to be comfortable." I felt my face flush with anger and embarrassment. "Victoria, Sophie is your niece. She's 15, not 5. She knows how to behave appropriately at formal events. I'm sure she does, but you have to understand, this isn't just a family gathering. This is essentially a networking event for James's career. His boss will be there, potential investors, people who could make or break business deals. I need everything to be perfect. And you think my daughter's presence would somehow make it imperfect?" Victoria sighed, the kind of exasperated sound she'd been making since we were children. "Don't be dramatic, Catherine. I'm not saying Sophie isn't wonderful. I'm just saying that this particular event calls for a certain level of sophistication. And frankly, I don't think she's quite ready for that." The casual cruelty of her words left me speechless for a moment. This was my daughter she was talking about, a straight-A student, an accomplished pianist, a thoughtful teenager who volunteered at the animal shelter and helped elderly neighbors with their groceries. But to Victoria, Sophie was just a reminder of my mistakes, proof that I hadn't lived up to the family's expectations. "I see," I said, my voice carefully controlled. "Well, thank you for being so honest about your feelings. Catherine, please don't take this personally. It's just one day. We'll plan a nice family dinner after the honeymoon, something more casual where Sophie would fit in better." Fit in better, as if my daughter was some kind of social misfit who needed to be hidden away from polite society. "I'll let you know what I decide about attending," I said. "What do you mean? Of course you're attending. You're my maid of honor." I'd forgotten about that. Victoria had asked me to be her maid of honor 6 months ago, during a rare moment of sisterly closeness. I'd been touched and honored, seeing it as a sign that maybe our relationship could be repaired. Now it felt like a burden, a role that came with the expectation that I'd smile and play along with her vision of perfection. "I'll have to think about it," I repeated. "I need to figure out childcare." "Catherine, you're being ridiculous. Just get a babysitter for the evening. This is my wedding day. I need my sister there." She needed me there, but only on her terms. Only if I left the most important part of my life at home. When I got home that evening, Sophie was in the living room practicing piano, her fingers moving gracefully over the keys as she worked through a complex Chopin piece. She'd been taking lessons since she was 7, and her teacher said she had real talent, the kind that could earn her scholarships if she wanted to pursue music in college. "How was work, Mom?" she asked without looking up from the sheet music. "It was fine, honey. How was school?" "Good. Mrs. Peterson said my essay on social justice won the school writing contest. I'll find out next week if it advances to the state level." Pride swelled in my chest. This was my daughter, intelligent, talented, kind, and accomplished. The idea that she wasn't sophisticated enough for Victoria's wedding was not just insulting, it was absurd. "Sophie," I said carefully, "we need to talk about Aunt Victoria's wedding." Her hands stilled on the keys, and she turned to face me with an expression of curious concern. "What about it?" I looked at my daughter, really looked at her. At 15, she was already showing signs of the beautiful, confident woman she would become. Her dark hair fell in waves past her shoulders, and her eyes held an intelligence and warmth that drew people to her. She was everything I could have hoped for in a daughter, and the fact that Victoria couldn't see that said nothing about Sophie and everything about my sister's distorted priorities. "Change of plans," I said, making a decision that surprised even me. "We're going shopping this weekend. You're going to need a dress for the wedding." Sophie's face broke into a radiant smile. "Really? I thought Aunt Victoria hadn't decided yet." "She has decided," I said firmly, "and so have I." The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of wedding preparation activities that felt increasingly surreal. Victoria had scheduled dress fittings, brunch planning sessions, and coordination meetings, as if she were organizing a military operation rather than a celebration of love. Each event reinforced my growing realization that my sister had lost sight of what actually mattered about marriage and family. The bridesmaid dress fitting took place at an exclusive boutique in downtown Hartford, the kind of place where they offered champagne while you shopped, and the price tags made my eyes water. Victoria had chosen elegant navy blue gowns that were beautiful but cost more than I typically spent on clothes in 6 months. I tried not to think about the credit card charge as the seamstress pinned the hem. "Catherine, you look beautiful," Victoria said, but her attention was already shifting to her phone, where she was managing a crisis involving the flowers. "The florist is insisting that garden roses aren't available in the exact shade I specified, as if this wedding hasn't been planned for 8 months. I watched my sister in the mirror, noting the stress lines around her eyes and the way her jaw tensed every time her phone buzzed. This should have been an exciting, joy-filled time, but Victoria seemed more concerned with executing a flawless event than celebrating her relationship with James. "How are you feeling about everything?" I asked. "Not the logistics, but the actual marriage part." Victoria looked up from her phone with surprise, as if the question had never occurred to her. "What do you mean?" "I mean, in 3 weeks, you'll be married to James. Are you excited about building a life together?" "Of course I am," she said, but her tone was defensive. "James is perfect for me. He's successful, well-connected, from a good family. We want the same things." I noticed she hadn't mentioned love, happiness, or any of the emotional reasons people usually got married. But before I could ask a follow-up question, Victoria's phone rang with another vendor crisis, and the moment passed. That evening, I found Sophie in her room working on a speech she was preparing for her English class. She was lying on her stomach on her bed, papers spread around her, completely absorbed in her work. "What's the assignment?" I asked, settling into her desk chair. "We had to choose someone who inspires us and write about why they're important," Sophie said without looking up. "I'm writing about you." My throat tightened with emotion. "About me?" "Yeah, about how you raised me on your own, went back to school to become a nurse, and always taught me that kindness and hard work matter more than money or status." She looked up at me with earnest brown eyes. "Some of my friends' parents are doctors or lawyers or executives, but I think you're braver than all of them because you chose to put family first, even when it was hard." I thought about Victoria's phone call, about her casual dismissal of Sophie as not sophisticated enough for her wedding. My daughter, who was writing about courage and family values, while my sister worried about the exact shade of roses and whether business contacts would be impressed. "Sophie," I said carefully, "what would you say if I told you that Aunt Victoria doesn't think you should come to the wedding?" Sophie's face fell, and I watched her process the information with a maturity that broke my heart. "Did I do something wrong?" "No, sweetheart, you didn't do anything wrong. Aunt Victoria is concerned that the wedding will be very formal and that you might not fit in with the crowd she's expecting." Sophie was quiet for a long moment, and I could see her working through the implications. "She's embarrassed by us, isn't she?" The direct question caught me off guard. "Why would you say that?" "Mom, I'm not stupid. I know we don't have as much money as Aunt Victoria. I know our house is smaller and our car is older and my clothes aren't from expensive stores. But I thought that didn't matter to family." The wisdom and pain in her voice made me want to cry. At 15, Sophie understood something that my 32-year-old sister seemed to have forgotten. That love wasn't measured in dollar signs or social status. "You're right," I said. "It shouldn't matter to family. And the fact that it matters to Aunt Victoria says something about her, not about us. So we're not going to the wedding?" I looked at my daughter, this incredible young woman who was articulate and thoughtful and kinder than most adults I knew, and felt something solidify in my chest. "Oh, we're going to the wedding, both of us, and you're going to show everyone there exactly how remarkable you are." Sophie's smile was tentative but hopeful. "Are you sure? I don't want to cause problems between you and Aunt Victoria." "Honey, the problems between me and Aunt Victoria existed long before this wedding. This is just the first time I'm not going to pretend they don't matter." The following week brought another round of wedding-related events, including the rehearsal dinner at the country club. Victoria had arranged for James's family to host an intimate gathering for 40 of their closest friends and relatives, which apparently didn't include Sophie despite my clear statement that she would be attending the wedding. "Catherine, I thought we agreed that Sophie wouldn't be coming," Victoria said when I mentioned bringing her to the rehearsal dinner. "No, Victoria, you decided that. I never agreed to anything." We were standing in the country club's foyer, surrounded by white marble and crystal chandeliers, the kind of opulent setting that was supposed to make people feel important, but instead made me feel like I was in a museum. "This is really not the time to be difficult," Victoria hissed, glancing around to make sure none of James's family could overhear us. "The Harrisons are very traditional people with high expectations. And what exactly are you afraid they'll think about Sophie?" Victoria's cheeks flushed. "It's not about what they'll think. It's about maintaining a certain standard. Sophie is your niece. She's a straight-A student who volunteers at the animal shelter and writes award-winning essays about social justice. What possible standard could she not meet?" "You know what I mean, Catherine. Don't make this harder than it has to be." But I was beginning to understand that I didn't know what she meant. Not really. What I was seeing was my sister choosing the approval of people she barely knew over her relationship with her own family. She was willing to exclude a 15-year-old girl, her own niece, because she was afraid that somehow Sophie's presence would reflect poorly on her. "Victoria," I said quietly, "when did you become someone who's ashamed of your own family?" Her face went pale, and for a moment I saw something vulnerable in her eyes. "I'm not ashamed. This is important to me, Catherine. This wedding, this marriage, this life I'm building with James, I need it to be perfect." "But why does perfect mean excluding the people who love you?" Before she could answer, James appeared at her elbow, handsome in his tailored suit, and every inch the successful businessman. Ladies, they're asking for the wedding party in the dining room. Time for toasts and embarrassing stories. Victoria immediately brightened, slipping her arm through James's and transforming back into the radiant bride-to-be. Of course, darling. Catherine was just leaving anyway. I watched them walk into the dining room together, Victoria's laugh ringing out as James whispered something in her ear. They looked perfect together, attractive, successful, socially appropriate. But as I walked back to my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that something essential was missing from their picture-perfect romance. The morning of Victoria's wedding dawned crisp and clear, one of those perfect October days in New England when the autumn leaves created a backdrop that looked like something from a magazine. The Riverside Country Club had been transformed into a wedding wonderland, with white flowers cascading from every surface and enough candles to light a small city. I arrived early for the bridesmaids' preparation, leaving Sophie at home with strict instructions to be ready by 3 o'clock for the ceremony. She'd found a beautiful dress at a consignment shop, navy blue with subtle silver threading that complemented her dark hair perfectly. When she'd tried it on, I'd been struck by how mature and elegant she looked, how any mother would be proud to have her at a formal event. The bridal suite at the country club was chaos, orchestrated by a professional wedding planner who moved through the room like a general commanding troops. Victoria sat in the center of it all, having her makeup applied by a team of artists while her hairstylist worked magic with curling irons and bobby pins. "Catherine," Victoria called out when she saw me. "Thank goodness you're here. The photographer wants to start with individual shots before we do the group photos." For the next 3 hours, I smiled on command, held bouquets at precise angles, and participated in the elaborate ritual of creating the perfect wedding album. Victoria looked stunning. Her dress was a masterpiece of silk and lace that probably cost more than my car, and her makeup artist had created a look that was both glamorous and timeless. But as I watched my sister pose for photo after photo, I noticed something troubling. She seemed disconnected from the actual joy of the day, more focused on how everything looked than how it felt. When James appeared for their first look photos, their interaction seemed scripted, more like actors playing roles than two people overcome with love for each other. "Doesn't she look beautiful?" Mrs. Harrison, James's mother, appeared beside me as we watched the photographer arrange the couple near a flower-covered arbor. "She does," I agreed. "Victoria's always been striking. James is so fortunate to be marrying into such a distinguished family," Mrs. Harrison continued. "Victoria's education, her career success, her social connections. She's exactly what we hoped for in a daughter-in-law." The comment struck me as oddly transactional, as if Victoria was being evaluated like a business merger rather than welcomed as a beloved family member. What about her personal qualities, her kindness, her sense of humor? Mrs. Harrison looked puzzled by the question. "Well, of course those things matter too. But compatibility is so important in marriage, don't you think? Similar backgrounds, shared values, common social circles." I thought about my own brief marriage to Sophie's father, a relationship that had been based on passion and genuine affection, but had crumbled under the weight of financial stress and his unwillingness to accept responsibility. Maybe Mrs. Harrison had a point about compatibility, but something about reducing marriage to a checklist of qualifications felt cold and calculating. As the ceremony time approached, I excused myself to pick up Sophie. I found her sitting on our front porch steps, looking like a young woman rather than a teenager in her elegant dress. She'd done her own hair and makeup, and the result was understated and sophisticated. "You look absolutely beautiful," I told her, and meant it. "Are you sure about this, Mom? I keep thinking about what Aunt Victoria said." "Sophie, I want you to understand something. The problem isn't with you, it's with Aunt Victoria's priorities. You have every right to be at this wedding, and I'm proud to have you as my daughter." We drove to the country club in comfortable silence, but I could feel Sophie's nervousness building as we approached the imposing stone building. Luxury cars filled the parking lot. Mercedes, BMWs, a few Teslas, and well-dressed guests were making their way toward the entrance. "Everyone looks so fancy," Sophie whispered as we walked across the parking lot. "And so do you," I assured her. "Remember, these are just people. Some of them might have more money than us, but that doesn't make them better than us." The ceremony was held in the club's garden pavilion, decorated with enough flowers to stock a florist shop for a month. Sophie and I took seats toward the back, and I noticed several curious glances in our direction. I recognized some of Victoria's college friends and a few business associates, but most of the guests were strangers, James's extended family and professional contacts. When the processional music began, I felt the familiar tightness in my chest that came with family events. Despite our recent tension, Victoria was still my sister, and I wanted her to be happy. As she walked down the aisle on our father's arm, looking radiant in her designer gown, I hoped that beneath all the pageantry and social positioning, she was marrying James for the right reasons. The ceremony itself was elegant but impersonal, conducted by a minister who clearly didn't know the couple well. The vows were traditional and generic, without any personal touches that reflected Victoria and James's actual relationship. When they were pronounced husband and wife, the kiss was brief and polite, more appropriate for a business meeting than a wedding. As we moved from the ceremony to the cocktail hour, I kept Sophie close to my side, introducing her to the few people I knew and watching with pride as she handled herself with grace and maturity. She chatted easily with Victoria's college roommate about her piano studies and impressed James's uncle with her knowledge of current events. "Your daughter is lovely," said Mrs. Chen, one of Victoria's work colleagues. "She's so poised and articulate for her age." "Thank you," I said, beaming. "I'm very proud of her." But I noticed that Victoria was keeping her distance from us, always seeming to be on the other side of the room when we approached her group. It was subtle enough that most people probably didn't notice, but the message was clear. She was still uncomfortable with our presence. As we entered the reception hall for dinner, I realized that Sophie and I had been seated at a table in the back corner, far from the head table where Victoria and James would be holding court. Our table mates were a mix of distant relatives and work acquaintances, nice enough people, but clearly not part of Victoria's inner circle. "The table assignments are interesting," Sophie observed quietly. "It's like a map of how close people are to Aunt Victoria." My 15-year-old daughter had just identified something that had taken me years to understand about my sister. Victoria organized her life in concentric circles of importance, and she'd placed us firmly in the outer ring. The meal was excellent, multiple courses of gourmet food that probably cost more per plate than I spent on groceries in a week. But as I watched Victoria work the room during dinner, stopping at each table to pose for photos and accept congratulations, I felt increasingly disconnected from the celebration. Then came the moment I'd been dreading, the toasts. When the wedding planner handed me the microphone for the maid of honor toast, I felt every eye in the room turn toward me. Victoria looked expectant, but slightly nervous, as if she wasn't quite sure what I might say. I stood up slowly, acutely aware of Sophie's encouraging smile from her seat beside me. For a moment, I considered delivering the safe, generic speech I'd prepared. But as I looked out at the sea of faces, many of them strangers who Victoria valued more than her own family, something shifted inside me. "Good evening, everyone," I began, my voice steady, despite my racing heart. "For those of you who don't know me, I'm Catherine, Victoria's older sister and maid of honor." I paused, looking directly at Victoria. "I've known Victoria her entire life, and I've watched her grow into a successful, accomplished woman. But tonight, I want to talk about what really matters in life." Victoria's smile faltered slightly, sensing this wasn't going where she'd expected. "Earlier this week, my 15-year-old daughter Sophie wrote a speech about someone who inspires her. She chose me, not because I'm wealthy or connected, but because she said I taught her that kindness and family loyalty matter more than money or status." I looked down at Sophie. Now, I have to admit that Sophie wasn't originally going to be here tonight. Victoria felt that a 15-year-old might not fit in with the sophisticated crowd she wanted to impress. A murmur ran through the crowd, and Victoria's face went pale. "But Sophie represents everything that's best about our family. She's intelligent, compassionate, hardworking, and has a strong moral compass. If we're ashamed of someone like that, what does that say about our values?" The room was completely silent now. "Sophie, would you please stand up and share what you wanted to say to your Aunt Victoria?" My daughter rose gracefully and spoke with remarkable poise. "Aunt Victoria, I'm not hurt that you didn't want me here. I'm grateful, because it taught me about the kind of person I want to be. Someone who values character over bank accounts, who's proud of family even when they're different, and who remembers that love can't be bought or traded for social status." The silence was deafening as Sophie continued. "I hope your marriage is everything you dreamed. But I also hope you'll realize that people who love you unconditionally are worth more than those who only accept you when you meet their standards." The room erupted in genuine applause. People were standing, some wiping away tears. Even James's intimidating business associates looked moved. As the evening wound down, Victoria approached me on the terrace, her perfect composure finally cracking. "You're right," she said quietly. "About Sophie, about family, about what really matters. I've been so focused on creating the perfect life that I forgot about actually living it. Victoria, you don't have to be perfect. You just have to be real." She nodded, tears threatening her makeup. "Will you help me figure out how to be a better sister? A better aunt?" "Of course. But you have to want it because family matters, not because it looks good." We walked back inside together, and I watched as Victoria approached Sophie with genuine humility, apologizing sincerely and asking if they could start over. Sophie, with her generous heart, immediately forgave her aunt. As I watched my sister and daughter laughing together on the dance floor, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: hope for our family's future. Victoria still had work to do, but tonight had been a beginning. The most expensive wedding in the world couldn't have given Victoria what she found that night. Understanding that love, authenticity, and family loyalty are treasures that can't be bought, only earned through genuine care and commitment.